Welcome, guys, to the Legally Balanced podcast. And today we have a special guest, Vanessa Reiser. She is a licensed clinical social worker, and she has an amazing and extensive background she's going to tell us all about today. So, Vanessa, thank you so much for coming on and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and so I obviously know a lot about you. I've got to read about you, and we had our pre-production call. So tell me a little bit about what you do and how you help people.
Sure. So I am a licensed clinical social worker practicing in the states of New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, and Florida. I specialize in narcissistic abuse and cult abuse. And I am best known for my run across New York State in a wedding dress in 11 days, which was 285 miles, to raise awareness for narcissistic abuse. I myself had been in a relationship like that, and now find myself advocating for all of my clients in private practice, along with the clinicians who work under me.
That's amazing. That is amazing. So I and we'll get into all of that. So are you in private practice right now?
Yes, I am in private practice, centrally located at the Jersey Shore, and with licensing in, as I mentioned, New York, Massachusetts, and Florida as well.
Okay. Do you have like a brick and mortar where you see clients, or do you meet them virtually?
Most of my clients are telehealth. That is the
Mm-hmm.
name of my private practice, therapist.
Oh,
Um,
okay. Got it.
so most of my clients are but I do see clients in person. Most people do find it pretty convenient, though, to do the telehealth, especially
Yeah.
post-COVID. People are kind of used to doing all the Zooms of it all. So,
I know it really, yeah, COVID really changed the world for us too. Because I'm a divorce attorney, obviously, as you know, and yeah, we used to never do like phone or Zoom consults. That was just not a thing that we did. Like everybody wanted to meet in person, and so it's nice actually to be able to connect. And then even some of our court stuff is virtual, which is kind of good. Um, so let's talk about your run that you did. And you call it. Do you have a term for it that you?
well, we just called it the narcissistic abuse run. So we do it every year now. It
Okay.
is an annual event. We subsequently ran across New Jersey, Connecticut, and Massachusetts, and we will be traversing Rhode Island this year with a little bit of a new initiative. When I cross Rhode Island this year for the first time, I'm going to circle the family court. So I'm going to try to get
Oh
some press
wow.
in front of the family court. Most of my clients are suffering at the hands of an abuser who exploits and manipulates the family court system, which, as you know,
Hmm.
probably happens very much in a vacuum, and no one really understands. This is kind of the underbelly of the most traumatic piece for my clients, which is that they exploit the family court and their children. Um, and so that's a new initiative that I'm launching with alongside Tina Swithin this year for the first time. We're going to try to bring some awareness to the family court system.
Is Tina an attorney or?
No, Tina Swithin runs One Mom's Battle on Instagram, and she's really well known for sort of bumping up against some of the more abusive guardian ad litems.
Hmm.
A lot of the people that are advocating for some of these camps, reunification camps, and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
she's I refer to her work as the Lord's work. I wrote about her in my book because she speaks truth to power in a way that I've never seen anybody do. Dr. Ramani and I talk about her as being kind of just the biggest badass, because it's hard to go up against these judges that are in these
Yes.
really big roles. And so she does that, and it's pretty impressive. So that's an initiative we're going to start this year.
Does she come in as an expert witness in cases?
I think so, but I'm not sure. And she has been dialing it back a little bit. She has a
Hmm.
couple of her own personal issues she's dealing with, but um, she's a beacon in a world that, as you know, is really, really treacherous for a lot of people.
Yes. Yes. I'm glad you brought all of that up. I was a child of divorce, and, I mean, that was over 30 years ago, but my parents had so what it is attorneys kind of feeding off of people's pain and emotion in some ways. So some of it is the client and some of it is the counsel too. And then if you get two bad ones, which they usually find each other, it can be just horrific for the kids, the other side. So when I open my practice, my sister works with me too. When we both, we feel like we trauma bonded with different things that we went through. But the way that we structure the practice is we try litigation as like a last resort. We try to get clients to, settle amicably through the mediation process. I mean, the court system has a place for extenuating circumstances, but like you were saying, rightfully, there are these cases that are really traumatic and that don't settle. It's just because one party is, people will use the legal system, the justice system to hurt their spouse. And then the kids are a weapon. And we did a video here today when we were talking about, I was talking about custody, and I talked about that exact topic. Because most court systems do 50-50. As I can only speak to North Carolina law, but most of, it's, 50-50 unless something really, really bad is going on. But then you get these people that, just try to use the court system to, manipulate and get what they want. And and you brought up a good point about judges. So I want to ask you, judges here are elected. So they may not they may not know anything about family law. Usually the attorney knows more about the law than they do. And I hate saying that, but it's true. What is it like up there?
Yeah, I think that judges have no idea what they're doing at all. And that's a huge problem. They have no education around abusive relationships and coercive control. And so when my clients are going in front of a lot of these judges, they are ill-equipped to detect for abusive behaviors. And oftentimes the abuser is very adept at being charismatic and being the victim and being an actor and being somebody that is well known in the community and philanthropic and makes large donations and finds the best attorneys and has the resources to...
Yeah, I was going to say, can hire the best attorney.
Yep, and has the resources to torture everyone involved, and yet sort of feign this appearance that they are, well-intentioned and all of this bullshit. So I see a ton of that with my clients trying to, kind of shift the narratives where the smear campaign started and the seeds got planted long ago. And it's very, very hard to unring that bell. And so they tend to get victimized. And none of this is happening with any watchdogs. There's nobody paying attention to this. There's nobody counseling the judges on, what coercive control is. They're not interested in getting educated. Similar to what we see with police and military, they are not interested in learning too much about this. And it is it's basically human trafficking in a way, because they're making a ton of money off the backs of women and children in the judicial system. So Tina does a lot of really important work where she highlights them by name and exposes them on her Instagram page, which is extremely bold, because, as you know, toxic people will come after you personally in all the ways. And so she has a lot of just badassery. She's like my hero.
Yeah, I understand. I feel I have over the years so anytime I've like media stuff I've done, I've talked very openly about our judges here like being elected and they may not know a lot about family law. I've had people kind of be like, yeah, you shouldn't say that or blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, it's true. Or I've called the court system a circus tent, because it is. So I wanted to ask you about, so are the judges there, do you know, are they elected or are they appointed by merit?
I think it depends on the district. I do think it's both regionally. Yeah. So it depends, I think, also on the kind of court. family court, I'm not entirely sure, and it is different in each district, I believe, because
Yes.
I hear both versions of that happening.
Yeah. So, have you ever been an expert in a custody case or brought in to testify?
I have been um I have been asked to input, but I've not testified directly. I've, been in the courts with clients that fly me to different places to just sit with them
Yeah.
and court watch. And I do biopsychosocials for my clients all the time. So I liaison with attorneys a good amount of my day because they're all being tortured by their abusers in that realm. It's literally pageantry for narcissists. They love the court system. This is their favorite place. They click around, and they love like the pomp and circumstance of it all. This, it's very intimidating for somebody
Yeah.
who doesn't understand it. And they have a ton of success. They have the attorneys that find the loopholes. And the attorneys a lot of times are narcissistic themselves. And so a lot of them are
Hmm.
kind of playing into one another,
Yeah.
and all at the expense of the most vulnerable in our world, which is our children. Fortunately for me, I never married a narcissist. And I think that's the reason why I'm able to speak out so boldly about this, because I'm not going to be exploited and tortured in that way. I still find myself in the family court system to this day. It's a different matter, but my son's father is neurotypical, and my son is also 25 years old, so we're not going to be going back to the family court. But the idea is that there are so many people who are really, really in trouble. They end up in jail sometimes. Their children are taken from them. They are re-traumatized by having to go up against these attorneys that just are so abusive. So it's a re-traumatization of sorts to go into the family court system in the first place and not be believed about your children being sexually abused, etc. So I hear the most horrifying stories, and I'm sure you hear some pretty bad
Yeah.
ones as well. But this is all I do, is deal with domestic violence. So that's kind of
Oh, I
my
see.
thing.
Yeah. Well, and that's interesting because you were saying the clients are narcissists and then they're finding attorneys that are narcissists. That's what I was saying. Like they find each other. Like the worst client will find the worst attorney. Um, they do. Like a lot of times you'll have like these really horrible. I hate to say it, like opposing counsel, but some of them are just really, really not just horrible to work with. And those are like, and then and then they have a client just like them, and it's just really hard to work with. And we just try to really empower our clients and just educate them and prepare them for what's going to happen. And every client that comes through our door, we just always make, like, we at least bring awareness or talk to them about, do you have a therapist, or do you have anybody you can talk to? Because these people are humans, and this is like, just a really hard time in their life. And I'm an attorney. I'm here to, like, support my clients any way I can, but I'm not a therapist or anything. I don't pretend to be. So, yeah, it's I think there's a lot to it, and I really feel like family law world has changed a lot over the last, 20, 30 years. I hope that, and there's definitely a movement to get away from court. I just hope it continues that way, and I think it will continue to get better. Do you see that too at all?
Well, abusers do not mediate. They do not mediate. They like the fight. The chaos
Mhm.
is what they live for. So they will take good or bad attention, and they would sooner bankrupt their $1 million businesses before they cut a check for a penny.
Yeah.
So they are all about winning, one-upping. And so I understand what you're saying about, sort of trending towards mediation, but by and large, the abusive litigant will not do that. And as a matter of fact, they will pretend to do it for a good amount of time just to suck the energy from that experience and then turn right into a trial anyway. So
Yeah.
if you're dealing with somebody who's particularly malignant, I usually tell my clients you have to find an attorney who is narc savvy, who is really interested in winning themselves, because then they can start to have this pissing contest, quite honestly. and maybe connected to the judges and the people in that region. It tends to be
Mm-hmm.
very corrupt, but also is going to put their foot on the abuser's throat. You have to fight fire with fire. They are not going to ever
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask
mediate.
you. Yeah, you have to just do fire with these people.
Yeah, this somebody who's malignant narcissist is not going to mediate. They are not going to be of sound mind and be logical and neurotypical and think about the best result, even for themselves. Again, this is about they will sometimes quit their jobs just so they can avoid child support. They just play a different game.
What does malignant mean? Malignant narcissist mean?
So this is somebody who is particularly overt on the spectrum. So we have the more covert version of the narcissist, and then we have sort of the quintessential douchebag. This is like the pop collar, Ferrari driving, Ferragamo shoes clicking through the courtroom floors. This is the guy who's, really kind of the far end of the spectrum, who's sort of like you could see them coming a mile away.
Mm-hmm.
And they tend to be really, really severe litigants. So they are going to be malicious in their perspectives of the court system. It's just going to be a fight. They like the fight. This is sort of the more malignant version. Somebody who's more benign, you might be able to get to mediate.
So somebody who, because we have clients that talk about the word narcissist a lot, and I think people in general like throw that word around. Are you referring to people that you think actually have the personality disorder? Like they could, if they were to be evaluated, they would be diagnosed, because obviously narcissism is a personality disorder.
Correct.
You think like these are people that, I guess my question is, are they that easily recognized, or is it something that you'd really to really know if somebody truly was, would they have to be evaluated, or what would?
It's extremely hard. It's even hard for clinicians. A good example of this would be Keith Raniere from the Nexium cult. He is particularly unassuming, and he is a psychopath. Ted Bundy was, working for a suicide hotline. It's not like you can see these fools coming. So it really doesn't matter if they show up and are obviously a douchebag, as I mentioned. Psychopaths are extremely hard to detect, even for clinicians like myself who are particularly skilled. So it's sort of the devil's in the details. I would probably be able to detect some parts of this, not altogether. They can fake empathy. They can portray themselves as, gurus, or, sort of priests, politicians, and poets are all sort of known for stabbing you in the back and kissing babies at the same time. It is not easy to detect. There is no answer that says, yeah, this is obviously. There are inventories that can be given, but again, they are liars, so it's very hard for them to take an inventory. That's why we don't see a lot of change, because narcissists are not showing up into therapy and saying, hey, I'm a narcissist. So it's really hard to detect. There's no real surefire way to say, okay, this is a narcissist. I do not think people are throwing this term around. I think there are far more of them and psychopaths all around us all the time. It's just now we're having this dialogue where we're using language and vernacular that describes the characteristics of them. And Dr. Ramani refers to it as a recipe. So it's not just one thing. It's sort of this whole cast of characteristics that they possess. And when clients are saying, this is a narcissist, I try to err on the side of that's probably true, because you would never know. These are your neighbors. These are the people who have the perfect lawn and the seemingly perfect marriage, and behind.
So there's not a certain thing to look for that.
Well, there's definitely characteristics that we can, say and identify as being those, but as far as knowing somebody on the periphery and being able to tell, you would have to almost see them behind closed doors.
Yeah. What would be a couple, just for our listeners, what would be a couple things that somebody would know? What are some red flags?
I would say probably it's hard because on the periphery, if you're living with somebody, it's easier to tell. Somebody who has superficial charm, who is particularly charismatic, that can be a huge red flag. Somebody who's a liar. So if you're with somebody in conversation and they sort of inflate their stories, if they exaggerate, if they tend to be kind of grandiose in their perspective of themselves and the accolades and the things that they've done, if they tend to brag about themselves, sort of braggadocious, that can be an indicator. If you're in communication with somebody and you find yourself confused, so, if there's actions that don't meet up with their words, those inconsistencies,
Mm-hmm.
people that are particularly passive aggressive or sarcastic, those can be indicators. In other words, they have a hard time communicating the truth. So they try to hide behind, jokes, innuendo, kind of like wise assery. Um, Somebody who's intimidating, um, somebody who is over the top with gifts. So if you meet somebody new and they're like, giving you these like love bomby statements, like, oh, you're such an amazing this, you're so, like, somebody who's very kind of out of the gate, fast and furious with compliments. But it really does tend to be a big recipe.
Yeah. Yeah, and do you think that someone who is a nurse, well, I guess, yeah, do they get better? Is there a, so I just think about somebody who has who's, a child of a parent like that. What, how does that affect the parent-child relationship?
I mean, in a word, they don't change. We see very little movement in their behaviors. It tends to be a rigid disorder. So they kind of like the way that they are. They feel like they're winning. They are manipulative, and they get over and tend to be very successful. So we don't see a lot of change. In terms of the relationship between the narcissistic parent and a child, the child, I think, of a narcissistic parent has it the worst, because if you get into a love affair with a narcissist, you can get out and find your way ultimately and sort of find that person you were prior. The child of a narcissist gets groomed the same way a cult leader grooms their fellowship. And they don't have an identity to fall back on, you know, in the first place, because they've always sort of known this reality. They don't have anything to gauge it against. And so they tend to have a bigger hole to climb out of, a bigger mountain. They have to develop an identity. They have to figure out who are they even outside of the noise of the narcissistic parent creating their self-esteem, etc. So that is a really, really tricky thing to do, especially if you grow up with a narcissistic parent in a
Mhm.
cult. That's even harder, because now you're
Yeah.
surrounded by people that are subscribing to a narrative and you don't know any better.
Yeah, I know. I was reading about that. So the cult thing, that's really interesting topic. What have you, like, are there any specific cults that you've studied, or?
Well, sure. In the book I wrote, Narcissistic Abuse, I aim to fuse the concepts of narcissistic abuse and cult abuse. So if you're in a relationship with a narcissist, you are in a cult. You are in a cult of one. You can be in a narcissistic family system and be in a cult of five. We see cults in communities, as you're mentioning, sort of the stereotypical cult that we think
Mhm.
happens, some faraway land. We see political cults. But really, a couple of good examples of cults that are local to me, anyway, were the Nexium cult, which happened in New York and fell apart in 2021. So very recently, not happening in a faraway land. And the Stolen Youth cult was also in New York, and there were only a gaggle of people in that cult, right? So
What was their beliefs, or?
the Stolen Youth cult is just basically this guy Larry was peddling a story to a bunch of students at Sarah Lawrence College, and had them believing that they were poisoning their parents. I mean, it was sort of crazy things that they began to subscribe to, but it's all about mind control and human conditioning, which is very Pavlovian. Um, as somebody who may have studied any amount of psychology, Pavlov's dog,
Mhm.
and positive reinforcers, we all can fall victim to some of these things. And these manipulators, master manipulators, are very adept at exactly that. So they just know how to manipulate people. And in the Nexium cult Keith Raniere was branding the women in that cult with his initials, and that fell apart, as I mentioned, in 2021. But these are examples of cults that are near to where I am right now, where I sit in terms of regionally. And they also ended fairly recently. So the idea of a cult, I think, my whole purpose is to destigmatize the idea of people falling victim to cult leaders, because we all are dealing with some level of groupthink.
Mm-hmm.
And it's important for us to develop autonomy and become independent thinkers to insulate ourselves and our children from that kind of scenario where you can fall into some kind of a groupthink mentality. And so that is all coercive control. So there's cults like what you might think of a cult. I'm sort of pushing against the idea of cults being something that happens in a faraway land and has some deity talking about religion or something. Cults can just be the family across the street where the parent is having this hierarchical, sort of authoritarian experience with that family dynamic, and that is a cult.
I see what you're saying. Okay, yeah, not just this giant group of crazy people in a cave,
right?
Like there is that one. Yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah, almost like a tribal mentality.
Yes, that's exactly right. And at the helm of every cult is a narcissist, a sociopath, or a psychopath. So we see them in these family systems. We see them, as you mentioned, in sort of the cult that's happening, in the desert somewhere that we have that stereotypical idea of. And then we see this in political climates where there's just people following blindly. So you have to really kind of think about coercive control as being something that can happen one-on-one, 1 million. There's sort of like different versions of it. And there's so many that pop up. People come to me all the time and they say, I was in a cult. There was this transgender, somebody wants to change their sex. That we saw this with the Twin Flames. It was on Netflix. Like there's different cults that pop up all the time. And that's why cultic families, cultic systems are all around us. And so not every one of them has a name. They're not going to say, hey, I'm a cult. So yeah, it's a little dynamic, but yeah, that's my whole passion, is to sort of fuse the concepts of narcissistic abuse and cult abuse, because they are the same.
Yeah, that's interesting. And can anyone be victim to that? Or is there a certain type of person that...
I think so. I was, and I consider myself intelligent and extremely strong, very pro-social, gregarious, outgoing, curious, and I definitely would have robbed a bank for that person. I was just totally in it. So I think it can. And in the Stolen Youth cult, and I wrote about this in my book also, Felicia Rosario was already a psychiatrist and a MD and a doctor, and she fell for Larry's bullshit as well. So I think that you can be highly educated. There's no socioeconomic tie that I can sort of, talk about. There's just no type per se. I think narcissists cast out a million lines, and if you don't understand it, and if you don't have the boundaries, then you can be victimized.
Because I always hear about, narcissists will prey on, they usually look for, maybe, I don't know if they look or they end up with people that are like different person, like maybe more of a people pleaser or so that's not always true then. Yeah.
I don't think so. I get it though, because I think people that are empathetic tend to be in certain roles, like givers and pleasing or forgiving characters. But I think that narcissists don't really have a type. It's like, does it have a pulse? They really need attention. So they kind of have a gaggle of supply, different characters. And I'm sure all of these characters have different things that are really wonderful characteristics. But I don't know that the narcissist has a type. I think they will just cast out lines. And if they get a bite, you're in, let's go. You're now in this rotation of people that they will get supply from.
Yeah, I've definitely known some people in my, I have had some people in my life that I feel like were of that category, but I have put up boundaries. They're no longer in my life. So and it makes for a much peaceful, much more
Yes,
peaceful life.
I bet it does.
Um, so I know well, I think your work is really great, and I hope that you continue to raise awareness about the issue. I think our legal system is, as far as the judges go and all of that, they've got a long way of, needing, it's like, because at least with family court, even just hearing from like a child therapist is kind of just becoming a new thing. I mean, and that's just so simple. Like, I feel like it's got a while. What it is the states need to take initiative to educate, and so until like I'll just like North Carolina State Bar until they take, like judges do conferences a couple times a year where they basically go to judge school and they get like an update. Unless there is some of this material introduced into one of those, it's not going to become a thing that's in the court system. But I think the more people talk about it, and the more that I don't know I honestly don't even know what it would take to get those type of materials introduced into being approved for, you know what I'm saying? And I'm
Yeah.
sure y'all, the states up there do the same thing. Like they do judges conferences and they go and learn about the new stuff.
Yeah.
Like, what does it take to get that to be because having an expert witness is really expensive. A lot of people can't do that.
Yeah, and it's hard because, as I mentioned, a lot of the people in those positions are narcissists themselves, and they don't really want anybody to know anything about it. We see
You
this
mean a judge?
yeah, we see this actually quite a bit with certain positions. Excuse me,
Yeah.
psychopaths. I think 1 in 4 CEOs is a psychopath directly, which is a statistic you can pretty readily Google. But they do
Yeah.
choose positions like military, police, I think surgeon, CEO, judges, and attorneys. But they tend to find these positions where they are given power,
Yeah.
and this is what they love. We actually see a lot of them as teachers because they like to have
Ooh, that's
creature.
scary.
I know that one freaks me out. I hate that one. Because it's
Yeah,
like,
that's like, I don't know, that rubs me different. I have 4 kids, so that rubs me a
oh
different
my
way.
God, Anna. Yeah, because you know why? They have all of these minions of sorts. They have
Yeah.
minds that they can groom. They love to do that kind of grooming and be the leader of that environment. And so they do pick careers that are like that. And
Yeah.
so
I
I'm
could
not
see that.
surprised. Yeah.
Like, and a lot, like what's really weird too about sometimes our judges, it's like, I don't know, like they'll just do really off the wall stuff, and I'm like, what? Did you hear any of that? Or they're just very like, they can be very like not desensitized, not and like not yeah, just don't care, I guess. Yeah. Yeah, I know it sucks. It really does. That's why we try to stay out of the court system. We really do, because it's just horrible. But
Yeah.
some cases you have to litigate. You don't have a choice.
Yeah.
You
It's
just do the
awful.
best you can. And then the problem here is, let's say you get an outcome from a judge that you feel like is like wholly unfair, inappropriate, or whatever. Well, the only option is to appeal the case. That's so expensive. People can't afford that.
Mm-mm.
It's probably the same there. Like, people can't afford to appeal cases.
No, they can barely afford to show up in the first place with
I know.
representation. So
Yeah.
it's a really corrupt situation that needs an overhaul entirely. And believe me, I love my lawyer, and I would be nowhere without his help. He is one of my greatest resources in my entire life. I put him in my book, and he has saved
Who is
me.
it?
Douglas Anton in New
Okay.
Jersey.
Does he do? Is this like a family law attorney?
He's not. He does criminal law, but
Oh, okay.
he's phenomenal. And believe me, he deserves the money that he earns because he is such an enormous asset. But, if there are people that are in positions where there is a socioeconomic issue and they can't afford
Oh
it,
yeah.
how do they manage that? I mean, I've been lucky and blessed to be able to manage it, but there are plenty that really just have to give up their own children. And it's really horrifying because they know that this abuser is capable of destroying their children, sexually abusing their children, and will do it for sport, and they have no recourse. And it's the horror of all horrors. It's the worst thing I've ever seen in my life is that scenario. It feels like it's a nightmare or a horror movie when I see it, and I see it a lot.
Yeah, a lot of a lot of people can't afford it, to be honest. Yeah, or they can only afford to get it to
Yeah.
a certain point if it's going through litigation. And there's not a
Yeah.
lot of like legal aid or anything like that. Like it just doesn't exist for family law. So I know it's really
Absolutely.
that's another reason why we try not to litigate, because I'm just like, you're not gonna be able to afford it. There's just no way. Like I'm not gonna be able to help you at all. And yeah, and then the other side will just like bury you and stuff like discovery and deposition just to like run up the bill and run your client out of money, which is happens all the time. So yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. We could talk probably for another 2 hours about all this stuff. So we'll have to have you on again to hear more about this and your journey and how you're helping women across the country. I think that's amazing. So thank you so much for what you do.
Thank you so much. I appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Okay.
So you can find me at Vanessa Reiser LCSW on Instagram. My website is TELLA therapist.net. And you can find my book, Narcissistic Abuse, A Therapist's Guide to Escaping. Sorry, I have to say that again. You can find my book, Narcissistic Abuse, A Therapist's Guide to Identifying, Escaping, and Healing from Toxic and Manipulative People at HachetteBookGroup.com.